Hello, I'm Chris Scher, Member Communications Director of the Society of Broadcast Engineers. Welcome to the SBE WEBxtra, the SBE chapter of the web. This is a monthly SBE meeting usually held on the third Monday of the month. The SBE is the Association for Broadcast and Multimedia Technology Professionals with nearly 4,000 members, mostly in the U.S., but also around the world. Earlier in 2024, the SBE released the first of the long-awaited self-inspection guides for stations. Because the FCC self-inspection checklists were outdated, the SBE, with assistance from the NAB, began the process to create a new set of guidelines for stations to follow to ensure FCC rule compliance. The FM and TV versions were released in April 2024. The AM version was released in September 2024. I'll talk to Ched Keiler, the SBE Government Relations Committee chair and leader of the group that is creating the guides, and Larry Wilkins, an ABIP inspector in Alabama and director of engineering services for the Alabama Broadcasters Association. But before we do, I have the SBE member update for October 21, 2024. Webinars by SBE continues to add new webinars. Using network analyzers in MOM proofs, Gary Cavell and Jeff Welton present a follow-up to the previous network analyzer webinar. They'll cover how VNAs can be used as a tool in gathering data in conducting an FCC method of moments proof of performance for an AM radio station antenna array. That will be held live on October 24 at 2 p.m. Introduction to Linux for online broadcasters will be held on November 14, also at 2 p.m. Eastern. Dean Mitchell from StreamGuys provides an introduction to Linux, some history of its development and adoption, along with some basic lessons on how to use it. Indoor production lighting for broadcast engineers Part 4 will be presented on November 21 at 2 p.m. Eastern. Cindy Cavell of Capital Airspace Group, C. Webster Marsh of Penumbra Controls, and David Butler of HDR Consulting bring the final installment of this four-part series to a close by bringing all the pieces of the series together. Lighting color samples will also be discussed. The 2024 Workbench Tips, a free webinar courtesy of SCMS, will be presented on December 12th at 2 p.m. Eastern. John Bissett, the author of Radio World's popular column and Telos Alliance Western Regional Radio Sales Manager, brings his popular tips as well as strategies to inform management of the crucial role you play at your stations. Also, you can always access the entire library of webinars by SBE presentations on demand. For more information on these and all the webinars by SBE, go to sbe.org/webinars. The next chapter exam window is in November of 2024. The application date for those exams is September 6. You can also arrange to take an SBE certification exam at any time via private proctoring. The Diamond Project is still underway. If your SBE certification lapsed before January 1st, 2023, you can reobtain it without taking an exam. Get all the details at sbe.org/diamondproject. And of course, more information on SBE certification and everything about it is online at sbe.org/certification. And that is your member update for October 21, 2024. The Society of Broadcast Engineers has released broadcast station self-inspection guides for AM, FM, and TV broadcast stations. The SBE partnered with the National Association of Broadcasters to produce the documents, which are the first part of a planned series to cover all broadcast services. These guides are designed to aid stations and alternative broadcast inspection program inspectors, that's ABIP, in evaluating a broadcast station's compliance with FCC rules and regulations. These guides are available for free download by SBE and NAB members as a member benefit. The FM and TV versions were released at the 2024 NAB show. The AM version was released at the 2024 SBE National Meeting held in Madison, Wisconsin in September. Our guests today are Ched Keiler, the SBE Government Relations Committee chair and leader of the group that is creating the guides, and Larry Wilkins, an ABIP inspector in Alabama and director of engineering services for the Alabama Broadcasters Association. Larry is also the 2024 James C. Willeman SBE Educator of the Year. Hello, Ched and Larry. How are you?
Good, good.
Good.
Hello, Chris.
Thanks for joining us on today's SBE WEBxtra. So to get this whole thing started, I figured let's figure out where we came from to get where we are today. So, Ched, this is one for you. Why don't you bring us up to speed? What's the history behind revising or actually creating these new self-inspection guides um, that are a necessary and needed item across the industry?
Well, as many broadcast engineers know, the FCC back in the late or mid 90s came up with what they called the ABIP inspection guide. And that was distributed for a little while, but it kind of grew stale. And the last publicly released version was probably revised around 2003, and there were some minor revisions in 2008. Well, at SBE, our mantra, so to speak, is education. And with that, the board started discussing the flaws within these guides. It was kind of brought to our attention by some of our members. And in April of 2022 at NAB, there was a detailed discussion about it. And at that point, the board voted to uh, go ahead and modify the guides. And they put this under this jurisdiction of the Government Relations Committee. And with that said, I went out and formed a committee to look at the guides in detail and to go ahead and modify them and bring them up to date. So we also brought in partners like the National Association of Broadcasters
Mhm.
and other partners who worked with us to enhance and modify the guides and bring them up to date.
Okay.
So then what was it, this past NAB 2024, we released the FM guide, what we call a FM self-inspection guide, and the television self-inspection guide. And then during our annual meeting in Madison, Wisconsin, we went ahead and released the AM inspection guide. And then we have a couple more guides in the works that will be released as they are prepared and become available.
Gotcha. And what are the remaining services? Or well, I mentioned maybe a couple of them that are outstanding that are in the works or in the pipeline at least to be considered.
Well, the next one that I anticipate to be released will be the low power FM inspection guide. The majority of the work has been done on that. Then we have drafts of the FM translator and FM booster guide, but there's some revisions that need to be done with that because there have been some changes in the rules recently.
Hmm.
So we're going to go back and revise that. Then we have the television translator and booster guide, and that also has some work that needs to be done. There's some rules that are in flux that would drastically affect that. And we are looking to have that modified and possibly released by the end of the year. However, it may get delayed because of rule changes on the FCC side of
Sure.
things.
Sure. So you mentioned the old FCC checklists had not been updated for more than a decade, more like 20 years, I think, actually, almost. Larry, as an ABIP inspector, what effect did that have on you as you were trying to do a station inspection by having such an outdated resource? Let me put it that way.
Yeah, that was a real problem. And back in the early days, when the guides were out that the FCC put out, a lot of stations used those. Engineers used it to do their own inspection to make sure that everything was up to par. So when I came in, most of the time everything was like it was supposed to be. As time went along, as Chad said, the guides got outdated because as normal, the FCC is always changing rules and changing different things out. And so these became rapidly outdated. And if somebody was trying to find something or do something with the old rules, that was, if they went by that standard, then sometimes it was so far out of date. And I used to have people call and say, well, I've got this, but this is not actually what we understand is correct anymore. So we had no way of doing that. Now, most of the inspectors that I know, Chad included, when we do an inspection and we write a report of the inspection, we include the FCC rule number and the text of that rule number, so they will actually know what it is. But they could go to the guide and see it. But since it got outdated, that wasn't the case. So now when you went into a station, they didn't have any way to get prepared for the inspection like they used to. So that's something we had to work on.
Right. Well, obviously a needed resource. So of course, we're all happy the SBE was able to step in. And even as Ched, you mentioned 2 years ago, a little over 2.5 years ago, sort of the initial effort began. I kind of remember this being discussed and debated even longer than that, but I think there might have been some hope that the FCC would have picked it up, and not slamming the FCC in any way. It just never came to be. So I guess I'm happy to say the SBE stepped in to fill the void and take it on.
Well, one of the things that's a little unique about the guides, that SBE offered that other organizations like the FCC might not have offered, are what we call recommended practices. And the recommended practices are basically there to guide the station into compliance and other issues that are of a technical nature, but they may not be explicitly spelled out in the rules.
Right.
Like one example comes to mind if we're talking about an FM TV, an FM radio station, and we're talking about modulation. There's a recommended practice that talks about how to use a modulation monitor to measure your modulation and to determine that you are in compliance with the rules. Where those kind of things didn't exist in the old guides, these are kind of a tremendous benefit now and an add-on to engineers, so that they have some uniformity and a standard to operate from.
Right. And also it's something with an explainer in a way, a little more insight into the rule, and maybe less, well, it's still subject to interpretation, of course. Two people could read the same thing completely differently, but and that's why it's a recommended practice, obviously. But at least a little more insight into what it means and how it can affect each station. I guess as an inspector, Larry, turning it back to you, I would imagine you would see some value in that.
Very much so, because like you said, the interpretation of the rules sometimes varies, even with the FCC. I've talked to several FCC inspectors on a particular issue. I may talk to four, and I get four different interpretations of how they interpret the particular rule. So it comes down to how, over the years, how it's being done most efficiently, and to follow as close as we can with the actual wording. The wordings of the rules sometimes are a little confusing. We always joke about it, that a lot of it's written sort of like a attorney wrote them, because it's a lot of wherefore and two fors and all this kind of stuff. So
well, in fact, they probably did. So
you're probably right.
Yeah.
So the interpretation, and we talk about this on the committee, is how do you interpret a rule, and everybody needs to, as far as inspectors are concerned, need to interpret it pretty much the same way, so that we're all saying the same thing to different stations. So yeah, that's important to do that, to make sure we're all on the same page when we interpret. And one thing that I do, I don't know everything. I mean, I'm old, and I should know a lot more than I do, but there sometimes I'll run across something where the interpretation is not really clear, or a station will ask me a question that I have my own interpretation, but I never try to just say something to be saying something to the engineer or the management. I say, well, I'm not really, let's get a better interpretation of this, and I'll call you back. So I know, we have all of us have contacts with the commission, and we call and try to get an interpretation from them. The normal response from the commission when you call and talk to someone, you'll ask them a question, they'll say, well, I'm not really sure, but I'll push it up the line and see if we can get a correct answer. So we can do that and then go back to the station and say, well, this is the way the FCC themselves interpret this particular rule. So that way we try to keep everybody on the same line.
Sure. That's excellent. So as far as the work that went into creating these new guides, Ched, you mentioned your committee. It's through the work of the SBE Government Relations Committee. There's a subcommittee under that, an ad hoc, if you will. I guess first off, who are the members of the committee? Who have you recruited to be working on these guides?
One of the recent new members here is Larry. And then the other members that we had, or most of them are board of director members or have been associated with SBE for a long time. Steve Campbell's a member, and he's also an inspector. Jeff Jeanette, Shane Tobin, Jason Ornelas, Tom Ray, and Dave Radner are all the members that participated in the creation of the guides. So, I appreciate their help. They had a lot of input in what was written down, and they were very knowledgeable and assisted tremendously in this.
A lot of drafts back and forth, I'm sure.
A lot of drafts back and forth, and I also, would like to also mention that, we did create a partnership with NAB on the guides, and Bob Weller, was very instrumental in input on the guides, as well as their legal counsel and the SBE's legal counsel. And then we had some third parties also involved.
Sure. Well, great. So we've already touched on the services remaining and the committee in place here. So as we noted earlier, with the old checklists getting out of date, what's your current process plan to ensure that the guides don't fall out of date and become stale and not so useful anymore?
Well, I think that there will be a constant review process from now on within SBE on the guides, and periodically they will be updated. I will note that we've already started updating some of the guides that we've released for the next release date. And we're, in addition to that, we're working on the other guides and some of the details that dovetail back into the FM guide, for example. We found that we might want to update one or two areas in there to be coherent throughout all the guides.
Right.
I think that was one of the problems with the FCC version of it, was it was not updated very regularly. So it just sort of sat there, and they didn't update it very often. So it got stale in a hurry.
The FCC guides lacked a lot of generational progress too. They were written back in the days of analog FM radio, so there was no IBOC, no discussion of anything digital. Television was the same way. It was written, and in fact, some of the rules that still exist apply to analog television or regular NTSC television and have nothing to do with ATSC 1 or 3. So we took that into account when we wrote the guides, and even though we may not have had the rules to thoroughly support some of the technical standards, we emphasized those where we could, and we also put those types of comments into the recommended practices.
Sure. And I guess you have the advantage as well because you're citing a specific rule. So, I mean, a lot of us monitor FCC updates on rule changes. So as a rulemaking is considered, kind of raises a flag on our side so that once it's actually enacted, can make it that much easier to go back and discover it's whatever section, whatever rulemaking has now been modified, so that particular paragraph almost could be updated. And then we can upload an update to the SBE and the NAB websites for download.
That's exactly what's happened with the television translator guide in particular, because the FCC is in the midst of updating those rules, and we felt it would be a little premature to release this And we had a lot of questions ourselves about like how public inspection files are handled with respects to translators and so forth in the television domain in particular.
Gotcha.
And there's also some of those questions in the FM translator side. But both of those services have drafts, working drafts, and they've had working drafts for over a year. We've strategically decided to play the TV translator guides just for that reason, though,
Gotcha.
because we knew the FCC was working on them.
Very good.
I think the obvious thing you'll see, Chris, is, and you know this as well as anybody else, technology is changing at such a tremendous rate, and the commission is trying to keep up with it, with the new technology, and again, not to throw anything against the commission, their rules sometimes don't keep up with the technology changes in the field, so that sort of creates a problem. And this is to the benefit of the committee. This is something to try to catch up with that. Even though it's the commission's rules sometimes are behind, the technology is up to another level now. So we sort of have to have a way to keep that at the forefront, especially for engineers to know how to do a particular task.
Sure. So we mentioned ABIP inspectors using these guides, and Ched, you had touched on even if a station doesn't have an inspector doing the inspection, not to be redundant, what about stations themselves? And actually, this is one for both of you. Any tips or insight into what stations can and should be doing, at least on their own, even before an official ABIP inspector comes by?
Well, I personally think that, you can use the guide without the inspector to bring yourself into compliance pretty easily. This will speed up the process for the inspector.
Mm-hmm.
And the guides are written pretty plain language, so anybody can use them. They're free to SBE members as well as NAB members. You just go to the website and look under the appropriate tabs, and you can find the guide.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's pretty straightforward, and we would kind of recommend that all engineers be exposed to the guides because they emphasize the current state of the rules as well as other recommended practices that a station should operate under.
Sure. Yeah, on the SBE website, there are two tabs on every page, the resources tab, but they're also under the legislative/regulatory tab. So SBE members can find them underneath either tab, same link in the end. And as you noted, you have to be a member of either the SBE or the NAB to download them. So, Larry, any insight on station use of the guides outside of an official inspector?
Yeah, I think one thing that I've actually run into on my inspections, and I spent some time with the engineer talking about this, is although the public file typically is not something that the engineer is actually tasked with to keep that up, it's a good thing that the engineer have an overall understanding of what the public file is and what's supposed to go in there and when it's supposed to go in there. And so these guides actually break down the public file line by line or item by item, where someone that has the copy of the guide can see what it's the same thing that most people realize is that it's the same thing you used to have in an old paper file, but now it's online, and it's much easier to do an inspection or keep it up to date and all now that it's actually online. But what I encourage engineers to do, like I say, even though they're not responsible for it, is to watch this, keep a watch on it for the station, and be sure to remind the management at the department head meeting or in the hall or the break room, oh, such and such needs to be filed by such and such a date. And if I was a manager, I would really think, that would raise my thinking of the engineer and knowing that he's actually looking after for the other parts of the station other than technical. So these guides have all the information in there concerning what's supposed to be in the public file. and when it's supposed to be put up there.
Sure. Very good. So what haven't we touched on? What else can we tell everybody about this new series of self-inspection guides that I haven't asked about yet?
Well, one thing that I've noticed from the inspector's point of view and the station's point of view is that I've seen the stations that I've been involved with that have been inspected by different inspectors. There seems to be a lack of a standard there. And I was wondering if Larry could comment on that a little bit. I noticed that some inspectors will go through a station really quick and you know, they might not go to the transmitter site. And I don't see how you can do an inspection without going to the transmitter site, and others are a lot more thorough. And what are your comments on that, Larry?
Yeah, I think the guides actually set aside some actual standards that if everybody follows those, it will put them more in line with each other. And the same thing with inspectors. Um, I talk to a lot of inspectors, both in the Southeast and around the country. And sometimes we get to talking about something and they'll say, well, no, I never look at that. Or no, I don't worry about that part. Or I do this or I don't do that. But to be effective and be for the actual client to make sure that you're covering everything that should be covered, there needs to be some sort of recommended guideline that the inspector follows, and the regular guidelines, the AM, FM, and TV guidelines get you started, get stations started in making sure everything fits right in the block where it's supposed to be. Then when the inspector comes in, he can follow right along. But like Chad said, we see from time to time engineers do inspections differently. There really is no training for an inspector. I know when I actually started doing inspections in Alabama, some of you may remember the engineer that used to be out of the Atlanta office, Angelo Diddy. He was a really great engineer, and he retired and took over the ABIP after he retired from the commission. And then when he decided to retire, he called me one day and he said, I recommended you to take over the inspections. He said, I just can't do it anymore. My knees are hurting and I can't walk out in the fields anymore. And so when I went to Atlanta, I did have to go up there and go through a little doctrine. I don't know if they do that anymore or not, but I had to sort of sit and talk with Fred Broche, was the bureau chief up there. And I remember one thing he told me. He said, now, one thing we don't allow you to do if you're an inspector, you're not allowed to do any work for the station because it's a conflict of interest. But we can, when we go in, recommend different practices and how to address. So it's really important, I think, that all the inspectors around the country sort of get on the same page. So one state's not doing one thing, and the other thing, like Chad said, if you take over another state, I actually did South Carolina for a while until they could get somebody up there, and I would look at things, and somebody at the station will say, "Well, the past inspector never asked us about that." I say, "Well, it's in the rules. You need to cover it." So there needs to be some sort of standard that an inspector can follow. And I think these guides sort of help that a great deal.
Absolutely. Yeah. Consistency across the board. Right.
That's right.
Yeah. Since we have you as an ABIP inspector, maybe a quick sidebar here. Are there any common shortcomings you encounter when you are going through an inspection? Is there one or two, maybe three common tips that you would provide of common oversights or even common errors or common misunderstandings?
The most thing that I find, and it's unfortunately is what the commission has the highest revenue generating fine for, and that's in the public file with the issues and programs list. People not filing those are supposed to be filed at the end of the quarter, by the 10th day of the end of the quarter. And it's not a difficult task to do. It's really easy if you just get in the mindset to do this every quarter. And I see that a lot. And people I really, the things that I find that people are missing the boat on, they don't normally do it on purpose. I don't think I've ever run anybody that says, "Oh, I'm just not going to put those up there." They do it because they forget, or they forget what time it was supposed to be put up there. So I guess to answer your question, I was sort of going around the block answering your question, but in the public file would be the issues and programs list
Mm.
and filing other required documents such as EEO and your ownership reports and stuff like that. Technical, the biggest thing I see with technical is EAS compliance. People not keeping their, well, now not updating their devices per FCC rules. All the manufacturers have had recent updates, so we find stations that are not updating, and that makes their device non-compliant with the FCC rules.
Right.
There's not a whole lot of problem technically at transmitters other than AMs with fencing and not doing their annual measurements of what we used to call NRSC measurements.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess those are probably the biggest ones that I run into.
Okay.
Mostly fences, not either not having a fence around the tower, or they have a fence and the gate's not locked. A real quick story. I did an inspection several years ago, and I went out. As a matter of fact, my wife went with me. She went with me on this particular inspection, and she sort of had been on some and sort of knew what I was looking for. And I looked at this guy's fence around the tower. Beautiful fence. I mean, it looked like it was brand new. And I asked her, I said, "Do you see something wrong with that fence?" And she looked, she said, "There's no gate." And so I told the guy, I said, "That's a really nice fence you got, but there's no gate." He said, "Oh, I thought it just had to be enclosed with the fence." I said, "No, you got to have a gate to get in to do." And that's the only one I've ever seen like that. Mostly I find that half the fences fell down because it's rotted or something, but
Why would you ever need a gate?
Yeah.
that's what he asked me, believe it or not. He said, "Why do I need to get in there?" I said, "Well, you need to maintain the tower. And for me, I need to check your antenna current." He said, "How do you do that?" I said, "It's in that little white box out there." He said, "Well, I got a step ladder. You can climb over the fence, but it won't do you any good because we lost the key to the antenna tuning unit. We can't open it up." So,
Oh, man.
I guess that's time for another reinspection.
Yeah, I was going to say, he gave you lots of notes on that inspection.
That's right. I had about 4 pages,
Yeah. Since
Oh,
we're in the
man.
political season here, I would add one more thing about the public inspection file is that the public matters or political matters needs to be updated, and updates on those are pretty frequent, depending upon what's going on at the station and who they're selling political spots to.
Sure.
That's true. The wording of the rule on political says immediate, that they must be uploaded immediately. And I asked an FCC inspector one time, "What does the word immediate mean?" He said, "It doesn't mean next week. It means as soon as you can get it up there, for obvious reasons, the way political ads are.
Mhm.
So it has to be uploaded as soon as you can."
Oh, wow. How about the opposite? What do you find in a public inspection file that really doesn't need to be there, that people think, or they just shove it in there thinking it's a place to store it?
Um,
Of course,
yeah,
this is probably more common with a paper version than it is with an online version,
yeah,
but
that's what I was fixing to say, that back in the days of the paper file, and Chad, I know you run into this too, you would open up the drawer and there would be like 10 or 15 years worth of stuff in there. And, it would take you so long to try to find the things that you need because people never threw anything away. So now that it's online, it's a little easier to see. One thing I tell people, and then I'll just mention this in passing, this is a neat software. The company that designed the software, it had a few glitches like any new software when it first came out, but it's a very nice software now. It's the same as your file folders in a file drawer. It's just got folders and you can create subfolders in it. And one of the things I always suggest to stations is And like I told you earlier, I look at the inspection as educational to the station as well. In your issues and programs, instead of just uploading the quarterly reports just haphazardly in there, and they get all out of order, and it's very hard to find. The website actually allows you to go in and create subfolders. So I tell them, I said, why don't you go in and create subfolders for each year? 21, 22, 23, 24, going up the line. Then each year, when you file a quarterly report, put it in that folder. It makes it so much easier to find. And now I don't count off on if they've got them and they're all out of order. I mean, because they're there, but it just makes it really easy to find and stuff like that. So, as far as putting the wrong stuff up there, the biggest problem, I guess, is they put the stuff in the wrong file. And I mean, that used to happen to the paper file too. Somebody just drop in a folder, not paying any attention. But you'll go in and find maybe a few of the quarters. And I'm harping on issues and programs because that's the one most sticks out in your mind. But they may put the first and second quarter in the right folder, and then they put the third and fourth in the EO folder. I mean, you need to put it in the right folder. I'm not sure what the commission's feeling is on that, because from my standpoint, if I find it, even if it's in the wrong folder, then, it's there.
Right. Technically, it exists. Right.
Yeah, technically it exists.
Not easy to find, but.
Well, I remind them, I say, the name of this thing is called the public file. The public has the right to go and look at that file, and they don't know. If they look in issues and programs and they only see the first and second quarter and they don't see the third and fourth quarter, they don't know to go look under EEO or some other unknown folder to see where it is. So need to keep it tidy.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other personal experience you want to share, Ched, on inspections and inspectors?
I emphasize, that if you get the guides, a lot of what Larry's talked about and even more are in the guides. One thing is you need to point the public to the public inspection file, and those kind of details are in the guides for the broadcast services. So, I highly recommend that every station have a copy of the guides for their service at least, and review them and try to adhere to them. And one thing that I'm interested in is I'd like to hear feedback from people that have looked at the guides, and they can reach us at guides@sbe.org. That's guides@sbe.org. And any feedback that you have, we would be interested in seeing.
Absolutely. Very good. So have we covered everything? Have I skipped anything? Anything else we need to touch on?
I think it's covered it.
As I said, if SB members or NAB members can both download the guides for free at the appropriate website on the SBE site, go to resources or to the legislative/regulatory tab. And SBE members can find both of them there. You'll need to log into the SBE website and go from there. But again, it's all easy to follow. Just click through and the members will be prompted as to what they need to do if you don't know your login or something like that. So easy to do and easy to find. So, well, this has been informational for me. I've been involved a little bit on the side in helping with this project as it progressed. I'm happy to see we have the three services represented now, the main three so far, with more in the pipeline, as you had mentioned, Ched. So that'll be good when we can share those with our members as well. And I want to thank both of you for taking a little bit of time today and giving us an update both on the self-inspection guides as well as a little insight into safe station practices and the ABIP program in a few cases. So if we don't have anything else to add, I'll say thanks for hanging out with us, and thanks for joining me today on the SBE WEBxtra.
Good, thank you. Enjoyed it.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for watching the SBE WEBxtra, the SBE chapter of the web from the Society of Broadcast Engineers, the Association for Broadcast and Multimedia Technology Professionals. Thanks again, Ched and Larry, for being with us today. And if you hold SBE certification, viewing the SBE Webxtra qualifies you for 1/2 point in Category G. That's attendance. It's just like attending a local chapter meeting. If you have an idea for a topic or a guest for the SBE Webxtra, send it to webextra@sbe.org. And thanks again for watching. I'm Chris Scher, SBE Member Communications Director, and we'll see you next month.